today we have a treat for you. We have Joann Ross. She is the author of over 100 novels published in over 27 countries. She's been writing for 38 years, and we're so excited to have you on.
I started in second grade.
Okay, so she's been writing, 25,
Since childhood.
Yes. So I cannot wait. I have so many notes that I thought, oh my gosh, I have to ask her about this. So fun. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Joann.
Well, as you said, I've written 38 books. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, and we lived under the flyway where all the migrating geese and birds fly back. And my first story I wrote I learned mallards mate for life. So my first story was really in second grade. And I wrote this story about two mallards, and a hunter shoots the female mallard and leaves the drake to raise the babies. And it was very dramatic. She took several chapters to die. I mean, she did not go to that great wetlands in the sky rapidly. I just went on and on with her dying, and the drake worrying and the little babies crying, And then finally she died, and that was the end. And it got a gold star. And I got all the teachers talking about it. And they wrote home to my mother that I wrote this really good story. So it was really funny. It was a small town of like 12,000 people in ranching timber country. And I don't know what gave me the audacity to think that I could be a writer, but that was the day I decided that I was going to be a writer when I grew up.
That is amazing. Okay, so you decided that in second grade. What did that look like going into adulthood? Did you pour everything into that? Did you work some other career? How did that look?
I did. I worked a lot of things. In my 20s, I built houses for a living for a construction company. I was a construction coordinator, and we built 380 houses. And I was a contractor's daughter. So my husband has to learn to live with the fact that every time I get a house just the way I like it, then I build another one. I build houses like other women knit. And one time it was funny. I just decided I was going to remodel the one we had because I really liked it. And I remodeled between books. And we remodeled every single room in the house and the yard and built a porch and everything. And the next time I was ready for a new house, he said, can we just build new so we don't have to live in it? Because all of a sudden he didn't mind building new again.
Oh my goodness.
So
okay.
That's
Yeah.
But I did that, and I wrote for I wrote for Arizona's largest daily newspaper for a while. And then I interviewed Steve McQueen's stuntman from Tom Horn. And I kept wanting to make him bigger, stronger, just like you would think a stuntman would be. And he was a really nice, quiet little guy, and he was very nice. And that was the day I decided the time has come to go ahead and do what you always wanted to do and write fiction. Because I was writing this guy, and I had to make him the way he really was. But he wasn't who I wanted him to be. So I just decided, go make up your own people. And that's what I did.
So your newest book, The Inheritance, we were just talking about how beautiful the cover is. Where was the inspiration for this? I know you said in an interview recently, this was a deeply personal book for you. What did this book mean to you?
It was a personal book for me because, first of all, I never knew my father. He deserted my mother when I was a toddler, so I never knew him. So I would think about, I knew from family talks that he lived in California and he had remarried and had another family. And I knew he always wanted to be an actor or a writer. So, you kind of go on, you don't really miss what you never had. So it wasn't traumatic terribly. But then when I became a writer, I kind of thought, I should go find him and say, ha, 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 look, I'm a writer, and find out if he was. So I Googled him and I found his obituary, but I found the name of his daughter. And so I kind of didn't think about it. Then a few years later, I was on Facebook and I thought, I wonder if she's on Facebook. And there she was on Facebook. And I thought about it a few days, and I sent her a little message and I said, do you know? And I named his name. And she said, yes, he's my dad. Did you know him? And I thought, oh, well, was my father too. And then I didn't hear anything for like 3 or 4 days. I mean, there was just dead air. And she came back and she said she'd run down the street, asked her mom, did Dad have another family before ours? And she said, yeah. The mom said, yes. And she said, why didn't you tell me? And this line you may have noticed in the book, got in the book. Her mother said it never came up.
Right.
And
That
that was
was
such
that part
a
in the book.
perfect
I was like, what?
line. I see. I had to put that when I decided to write the book. I had to put it, and I thought that's such a word. Who asked their parents? How could it come
I was
up?
so mad when I read that. I was like, who says that?
Well, my half sister's mother said it.
That is true. I am just incensed again.
Yes, it was true, and so that got me thinking. What if the two sisters, one didn't know the other and the other, and then I thought, well, what if I do three sisters? And I played with that for a while, but I couldn't do anything with it, and I put it away. Then a few years later, Jackson Swan began talking in my head, and he would not shut up. And I had no idea I wasn't going to write a book about him, but he just kept talking. And all of a sudden, I realized that the book wasn't about three sisters, it was about three daughters, because each had a different relationship or non-relationship, and that informed who they were in their life. And once Jackson showed up, I had my book.
Yes. And he was a likable character. I mean, he just was who he was.
He was incredibly flawed. I fell in love with him, and I was not going to put him in the book. I was going to start with them being told by the lawyer that they inherited.
Mm-hmm.
But then he has such a strong voice. I mean, he's the one that gave me the book, actually. It showed me how to do the three sisters. And so I thought maybe if I showed him, he wouldn't seem as bad a dad as my own father was. He was very flawed, though, but he really, I researched those crisis photographers and reporters a lot. And there's a lot of psychological studies written on them, that most of them actually do have survivor guilt and PTSD, because unlike, your instincts are to jump in and help people when you see terrible things happening, but they help people by not jumping in and standing there and showing the terrible things. And then the rest of us can find out what's happening.
My favorite character in the book that I loved the most was the grandmother.
Was who?
The grandmother.
Madeline. I love Madeline. I originally thought the sisters were going to find her in journals and read the journals and read about her adventures. But Madeline, just like Jackson, she took over. She was going to tell her own story her way. And what I like about Madeline is she begins as that 13-year-old, and she's getting her first high heels, kind of, not high heels, but first pair of heels. And she's worried about will a boy dance with her and will he maybe kiss her. And she goes from that to fighting gradually, though, not just a big jump, but gradually, step by step, she goes to being a full-time Nazi fighter. And I loved writing her growth.
That was really good. I love going back into that era in the 40s, and that's really one of my favorite things to read. And I loved her cooking and her garden and just being so incredibly French, even after so many years. And I was glad that they had that with her. And that was just so good. So I read something in an article that this was really a personal book to you because you got sick in the middle of writing it. Is that right?
I got what?
Sick in the middle of writing it?
Oh, I was in the hospital.
Yeah.
I had 8 surgeries between February of 2019, between March of 2019 and February of 2020. I was in the hospital 66 days, and I got 2 hospital-borne superbug infections that kept trying to kill me. And my husband and I did 14 weeks of IV therapy at home, and we'd have to do it 3 times a day, which means we'd have to get up in the middle of the night. And we would turn on it was like having a new baby in the house or something. We were so sleep deprived. We would turn on all the lights, and we would repeat every step because there was 2 different medicines that had to be given, and they were like 40 minutes apiece. So we would repeat every step, like do the syringe, watch the syringe, pull the syringe, do this. And we would do that. And we'd repeat it to each other to make sure we didn't screw up because we were so scared. We were doing all this IV stuff, and yeah. So the funny thing was the book was supposed to come out a year earlier, and there weren't so many World War II books then because they weren't. And then all of a sudden, by the time the book came out, I kept watching when I was in the hospital. I kept saying, all these books are coming out. But I couldn't write. I just couldn't write for all that time.
I think I read in an article the nurses were really championing you and saying, they really wanted you to get better so you could finish your book. And that was just, oh, my heart broke. I was so glad that you made it through and that you're healthy now. And how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling fine. I kept telling, it's funny, I still learning to walk, and I have an appointment with a surgeon again Tuesday. But what it turned out, it was a disease that only 15,000 people a year get, and it deprives your bones of oxygen, of blood. And so my whole hip and the top of my thigh had died, and they were just not there anymore. And so, but I kept telling all the doctors, and it was one of those things, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, like, the infections and all that.
And my surgeon was a pandemic on top of that.
Yeah, and my surgeon was kind of famous. He talks around the world that they brought in to do me. And he always used me as the case of the worst patient he'd ever had, because all these things he'd never had happen before happened to me. But I kept telling everybody, I kept saying, you have to keep me alive because I have a contract. I have a contract. You can't let me die. And it was, I didn't.
Oh my goodness. Well, I am so glad that you are healthy. I have to ask you this because you are one of the original masters of romance writing of all time. So how has the writing world changed for you now compared to when you first started in the early 80s?
The writing world has changed a lot in the fact that it was very, very structured on what everybody wanted to do. Like even this book, I was a little nervous because this book, you might have noticed, had like 9 characters. And that would never have been done in the old days. And I don't know how it was for historical writers. I only know contemporary. We contemporary writers, if you wanted to write contemporary in the 80s and early 90s, you had to write category because there was no single contemporary. And so you wrote category. And category didn't have the rules and the formats people say. It wasn't, you were allowed to do things. I mean, my editor always at conferences would say, Joann's my more off the wall writer, because I would put in ghosts and I'd put in, guns and stuff like that, and murders and stuff. But there was, within that format, you all knew what size it was, how many chapters you had, and everything. And
I like that you say that so casual, and murders and stuff.
Well, there was a time, if you look, I wrote serial killers, high-risk serial killers and stuff. And that was because the women's fiction, because even in my categories, my editor once told me, she said, you're the only person I know whose characters have families. She said, most of them are orphans, or, you don't mention the family. I've always written about family, and I realized over the years that what I was doing, and it was like tests, I was writing the families I wanted, because my family was so dysfunctional. I was just creating my own families every time I wrote a book, and I would write these families I loved. And so, those were, it was just different. And then one time I wanted to do a sequel, and oh no, sequels weren't allowed. Trilogies weren't allowed. And God forbid anyone would do a series. So,
and now series are everything. And you have so many good series.
Thank you.
You do. Yeah. You have a lot. Men of Whiskey River. I mean, that's really taken it back. Callahan Brothers. You've got Stewart Sisters, Shelter Bay. If you guys want a series, you've got Honeymoon Harbor. You have over 100 books. You really did not fit in any of the boxes. You made your own box.
Yes. Shelter Bay actually is set where my husband proposed to me when I was 18.
Oh, I have a question about that too. So you said in your bio that you married your husband twice.
Yes.
Okay. I know there's a story there. What happened?
Well, I have to tell you, it was the 70s. And the 70s was a very tumultuous time for relationships, because women were starting to think that we could do things out in the world.
How dare
and that we, we should be allowed to do things.
Yeah.
And we kind of pushed to do things. And I had known him since I was 15 and he was 18. And so most men, some never got it, as you can tell these days, but some men took longer than other men to get the idea. And when I had my own office and I was flying on a company plane, and my husband had a really good job and everything, but it was still, he wasn't used to his wife getting on a plane and flying away and having her own office and everything. And it just made tension in the family that was really very hard. And he'd go to work. I was the first woman on our street to go to work. And unsurprisingly, the first woman on our street to get a divorce. Because he would go to work and everybody say, "What's wrong with you that you can't support your wife and your son?" And it was a hard time. And so we got a divorce, and it was truly a friendly divorce. We were both very sad about it, but it just wasn't working. And he was actually gone. He had a job. He had going up the ladder, the corporate ladder. He was supposed to go around to 5 states, I think, and train other people to do their jobs. And so he was gone, like from state to state to state. And every time he'd come back to town, he'd see our son and we'd see each other and everything. And then finally we started realizing that we had both become not the kids we were that we'd met, but we both really liked, and we'd always been in love. But we started realizing that we both really liked each other too. We liked who each other was. And he came home he was in New Mexico, and where he was, they didn't have oral surgeons. He came home to have all his wisdom teeth pulled out. And he asked me, he said, "Will you take me to the hotel? Because the doctor says dentist says I won't be able to drive." And I said, "Okay." So I went, and I looked at him, and I don't know if you've ever seen anybody that had all 4 wisdom teeth pulled out, but it was terrible. I thought, I can't drop him off at the hotel. So I brought him home, and I said, "1 negative word and you're out." I was, and he never left.
He never left. That is an awesome story.
So, when people say they don't believe reunion stories, and I write a lot of reunion stories, because again, I lived reunion stories. So I can write dysfunctional families and reunion stories really well. And I can write secret babies because it turns out I was a secret baby.
I think I love that so much because really, is there really such thing as a non-dysfunctional family? I mean, there's the people that fake it and they're liars. Okay, everybody's got dysfunction. Everybody does. And some are just better at hiding it than others, and some don't care. They don't even hide they're crazy. They're just owning it. And so I love that about books that are real stories. They're not unicorns riding a rainbow. It's real life, real mess.
And yeah, it's not, none of them are my story, except I think I'm a lot of Tess, I think.
I could see
probably a lot of Tess, I think. But but I have so many things that fit into the stories I tell that I can draw from. So, all of them are very personal, but this one was the most personal.
I feel like Tess was such a pistol. She didn't take any crap from anyone. That opening scene with the lawyer, I don't want to give too many spoilers because I know a lot of people are buying the books and reading them, but I love that scene. She did not give him an inch. She was pretty hard on him.
That scared me when I wrote that scene because I didn't expect that. And I had decided I don't plot out books. I get the characters and I let them tell me the story. And I find a situation, just throw them all in, and then I just let them go. And that's how I write books. And editors have learned not to expect synopses from me. And I'll write like maybe 2 paragraphs because the people starting to do the art and back cover copy need to know something. Yeah. But Tess, I always planned that she would be with Gideon, always. And then when that scene happened with Donovan, I was actually screaming. I said, "Tess, no, you can't be with Donovan." Because I think a lot of people thought with Donovan that that's who she was going to end up with because their chemistry was so strong. But then it turned out that they made very good friends. So
they did. What are you currently working on?
I just turned in the 4th book of the Shelter Bay Burke story, of the Hardyman Harbor. I just turned in Burke's story. He's the football player.
Okay.
I turned in his story.
So this will be that now I'm taking one, and you have 2 short ones in there, right?
I I have one novella that's coming out next in the back of Burke's book.
Okay.
And it was a novella written solely for Walmart. Walmart got the rights to it for 18 months, and Harlequin got the rights back, and they're putting it in the back of Burke's book. And that story was a vet and Megan, who runs the clean team. A vet came to town, and Megan, who runs the clean team, married the vet. But it's a bachelor auction, and all the women get together to bid. He asked them, all the other women besides Megan, he asked them, please, that they can go however high they want, but he wants them to win him and give him to Megan, because he's been in love with Megan for a long time. Megan's been in love with him, but she's the only person left. He's cleaning. She runs his company now, but she cleans his house, because she's even seen his underwear because she does his laundry. And so this is really, oh wow.
Really romantic.
Yes. But yeah, neither one of them want to act on it. It's a little bit like Natalie and Donovan. They're afraid to ruin the friendship by being the first one to say anything. And so yeah, that I had a grand time writing that. And that'll be in the back of Burke's book.
I am going to check out that series. That looks really good. You have really good covers too. You guys, look at her cover, and I have it pulled up down below. You guys can grab it. Her book is actually 41% off right now, so definitely grab it. I love your cover. You have great covers. So what advice would you have for an aspiring writer today, now that you are the Grand Marshal of all romance?
Okay. I will say this. First of all, read. Don't think that, I can write a romance because I'll make a lot of money if I wrote romance, and it's the #1 genre and all that. And I can write a romance, because if you think that, you can't. I mean, you can write one, but nobody will ever buy it or read it. You have to actually read and love what you write. I actually was going to be a horror writer first. And, but if you think about it, horror is almost exactly like romance those are the only two genres that are character driven. All the other things, you need plots and you need things like that. But horror, you have to care about whether somebody's run over by a Plymouth named Christine, you have to care about that. Or if a clown comes out of the sewer and grabs them, because that's what you're more invested in than the horror part of it themselves. You're invested in what will happen to those people. Which, when I realized that there was Stephen King, Dean Koontz, and John Saul, and I could find no women horror writers, I went, okay, what else do I have out there? And I found all the Harlequins, and I read all the Harlequins, and I must have read about 300 romance books. And as I said, they were all Harlequins in those days because there wasn't any single category, single contemporary. And so I must have read about 300 of those and just kind of absorbed them and came to love them. And then I started writing, and I wrote whole books, because again, I don't do synopses. I wrote whole books, and I got 13 rejections on 9 books, and over a 1-year period. And I couldn't figure it out, because I was sitting there, I thought they were pretty good. And then I didn't know, because I didn't know any writers or anything about publishing. I was working all alone in my little blue room. All the romance was about to take a big leap. Desire was about to come out. Candlelight was about to come out. All those books were about to come out. And I was writing Mills and Boon stories. And Mills and Boon kept writing me back, and they said, we already have our American writer, but we invite you to read her books. And so they didn't want another American writer. And I didn't know that all these other companies were buying books from writers they already knew, that they'd met at conferences and stuff. And I went to the second RWA conference, and that's when I figured it out. And I went back and wrote another book. That's when my husband was actually, I think, getting bitter from that. But anyway, so the first book I wrote, then I sold a book in the week of Thanksgiving. Then I sold a book 7 days later. And then I sold a book right after New Year's. And that was to Silhouette and NAL. So once I found out what people were writing. So that's why you have to read and read and read. I was reading and reading, but I didn't know that there was going to be this enormous sea change that happened all in that, like 1982, 83. I didn't know that. So read and read and read. Then another thing I would advise, finish the book. Too many people begin a book and then they get to the middle and it gets hard. And there's always all these ideas out there, and they will jump and they will jump to the other book. And if they do that too often, they will never finish a book. I know more people that I've known for years and years and years who are still working on a book because they don't finish it. They just go do other books. And so once you start, don't let yourself stop, because you might not have anything publishable, but you will know that you wrote a book. And once you know you can write a book, then you can write other books. So that's my advice.
That is great advice. So as for the read, which I love, by the way, as you can see, I'm a pretty voracious reader.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you reading? What are you loving right now?
What am I loving? Right now I'm doing research. So I'm mostly reading that. But then I'm reading friends, anything Jill Chavez writes or anything Helen writes. I have a lot of friends that I stop and I read their books, and I'm waiting for Jill Chavez's book to come out, and I pre-order. Oh, gee, people, please pre-order.
Yes, please.
Because number one, it helps Amazon to know how many books to buy. It lets the publisher know how many books to print. And number three, you don't have to remember it anymore.
It's there. It shows up.
I wake up in the morning and there's a book. Or if you're buying print, a book shows up at your house.
Yes.
And if they tell you the book is coming out like 9 months sometimes before a book comes out, I could never remember that. There's no way to find out what books are coming out.
I have the attention span of a squirrel. So
yeah.
I absolutely, anytime one of my favorites come out, or I see something and I'm like, I really need that, I just go ahead, pre-order it right on my Kindle. And sometimes let me see what's on my Kindle. And I open it and refresh and I'm like, oh, Christmas.
I find like sometimes I forgot that I ordered.
That's the best feeling though.
I purposely did not read while I was in the hospital. I have a little thing on my Kindle that says, congratulations, you've read 975 days in a row or something like that.
Yes.
That's enormous. I didn't know till I stumbled across it the other day that they keep track. And it keeps track on your Kindle, but I stumbled across that. But while I was in the hospital, I was very careful not to read any World War II books, because I did read one and I thought, oh, we're reading the same research book. And because we didn't handle it the same way, but I saw something that told me we're reading the same research books. So I refused to allow myself to read any World War II books, which I'm now catching up on a little bit. But I was afraid that if I saw something somebody else had done, that I might not let myself put that incident in my book, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, that's really hard. You're drawing off of history. It's not something it's a real thing. And I get that. Yeah.
Normally when I'm deep in a book, I don't read romance. I'll go read, like I read Razorblade Tears, and I'll read, James Lee Burke or something like that. And I'll read something totally different. So it doesn't, when I go write, I'm in just my own romance world, and I'm not, and then I save up the romance books to read. And it's not because I'm afraid I'll copy them or anything. It's just, I want my romance mind to stay in my story.
Yeah. It's not, I get that. And I have to say, for work, I've been reading a lot of World War II books because I have a lot of authors coming up. Some of the ones are like Anita Abriel, who's another one that I had? Michelle Gable. Some others coming up too, like Georgie Blaylock. And so I have read those, and I don't see any ties to yours at all. Very different, very unique. And I really loved all your characters. I loved what you did with Charlotte, and I have a daughter named Charlotte, so I love that. I felt like I really didn't like her husband at all.
Oh, speaking of names, I forgot to tell you. I was going to tell you, if I had a daughter, she was going to have your name.
Oh,
that was my favorite girl name. I had a Patrick, but then I didn't have any more children.
Patrick is my family name, and I actually have my son's named after my dad, Ethan Patrick.
Okay, there, see?
Yep.
Yeah, Aaron was going to be, if I had a girl, it was going to be Aaron. So
Oh.
I love that name. I actually have an Aaron in, the book that came after Woman Talk, Fairhaven, I think, in Irish book.
I always,
which is one of my favorites.
We are Irish. That's funny.
Yeah, I was too. We were McLaughlins.
I have an aunt named Joann. So, yeah. Well, if you ever want to make an Audrey character, that was my grandmother's name, and she was a big fan of yours. So,
and Audrey, okay.
And that's a great historical name.
Well, I have an Aubrey. I mean, that's close.
Yeah, that's close. That's close. But I know that would be really cool too.
Charlotte was another surprise to me. Charlotte's storyline was entirely different. It was not. Charlotte was not going to come out of her shell and become as bold as she did in the story. In fact, I was going to use her as a vehicle for the sisters to bond while the other sisters helped her out of a problem with that terrible husband.
Yeah.
And actually, I was going to have her get pregnant. I was going to have her trying to get pregnant when the book opens, and then she gets pregnant and he wants the baby, and they get in a big custody fight, and that's how they bond. And when I started actually writing Charlotte, I realized that Charlotte was a lot stronger than I had initially thought she was. And she just that she had been strong when she met him. And so it was easier for her to reclaim herself. But I think a lot of women can, if they're not careful. Like, I don't know if you heard the song yet, that One Brave Life, that Jasper Lepak wrote. But it's on my Facebook page from the interview yesterday. And everybody in that book had to be brave, had to have their brave life. And whatever character it was, it had different kinds of braveness. And I think women, if they're not careful, they can lose a little bit of themselves piece by piece and not realize it till they end up like Charlotte. I think that can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think at any point in their life and dial back in, and, proof that we can reunion like you and your husband did, and just, I always tell my kids, we're not trees. We can pivot. We can, do what we need to do and chase what we need to chase and, get our dreams. So I am just so glad that you were on the show today. I just cannot wait to read more from you. So when do you think your new series, your new Honeymoon Harbor book will be out?
It's June of 2022, tentatively.
Okay. Nice. Okay, well, that's something to look forward to. So I'd love to have you back. I'll reach back out with you and we can talk about that one too. Where can we find you on social media, and where do you mostly hang out here online?
Okay. I'm on Facebook at Facebook Joann Ross Books, and Facebook.com Joann Ross Books, and I'm on Instagram at Joann Ross Books.
Awesome. Well, everybody follow her. I have highlighted The Inheritance down below so you guys can grab that and get started reading today. You can download it instantly to your Kindle or device, or you can just get the paperback. And thank you so much for being on the show, Joann.
Thank you for having me.
Have you. Yes.
It was a grand time. It was like talking to a friend.
Well, I consider you a friend, and I'm so grateful to have you on the show. Stand by.